The shopping bags hit the marble countertop with the sound of expensive leather meeting imported stone. 4 bags. Hermes, Chanel, something Italian I couldn't pronounce. The receipts would tell the story later, but I already knew the numbers would make my accountant weep. Nola Vero, still using her maiden name for professional reasons, stood in our kitchen like a general surveying conquered territory. Her blonde hair caught the afternoon light streaming through our floor-to-ceiling windows, the same windows I'd worked 60-hour weeks to afford. "We need to talk, Silas." She didn't look at me while she spoke, too busy arranging her purchases for maximum visual impact. The woman understood presentation. I'd give her that. I finished my coffee and waited. 3 years of marriage had taught me that Nola's conversations followed a script. My job was to listen, nod, and eventually write a check. "I've been thinking about our situation." She turned, finally making eye contact. Her blue eyes held that particular shade of determination I'd learned to fear. "About what I need versus what you provide. Enlightening, I'm sure." I kept my voice level. Sarcasm was my defense mechanism, though it rarely penetrated her self-absorption. "Don't be cute, Silas. This is serious." She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. The gesture pushed up her designer top in a way that might have distracted me once. Now I just calculated the cost per square inch of fabric. "I'm listening. I have opportunities. Real opportunities. The lifestyle blog is taking off, and Marcus from the gallery wants to represent my photography. But I need to look the part. I need to be seen in the right places, wearing the right things, driving the right car." I glanced at the bags. "And today's shopping expedition was market research?" "This is exactly what I'm talking about." Her voice sharpened. "You treat everything like a joke, like my career doesn't matter." "Your career." I repeated the words carefully. "The one that's generated roughly $300 in revenue over 2 years?" Her face flushed. "It takes time to build a brand. You wouldn't understand. You just push numbers around all day." Those numbers paid for everything she touched, but pointing that out would only escalate things. I'd learned to pick my battles. "What exactly are you asking for, Nola?" She straightened, preparing for her closing argument. "I need more freedom, more budget. The credit limit you set is embarrassing. Do you know what happened at lunch yesterday? My card was declined in front of Rebecca and the girls. Declined. Like I'm some college student maxed out on shopping. The credit limit was $15,000 per month for a woman who contributed nothing to our household income." "I see. I don't think you do." She moved closer, her voice dropping to that intimate register she used when she wanted something expensive. "I've been patient, Silas. I've tried to make this work, but I can't keep living like this." "Living like what? In a penthouse apartment? Driving a car that costs more than most people's houses? Living with someone who doesn't support my dreams?" The words came out sharp and final. "Here's the thing. If you can't afford my lifestyle, maybe you should step aside for someone who can." The kitchen went quiet except for the hum of our sub-zero refrigerator. I studied my wife's face, looking for some sign that she understood what she'd just said. Some recognition that she'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. Nothing. Just expectation and barely concealed impatience. "You're absolutely right," I said finally. She blinked, clearly expecting an argument. What?" "You're right. If I can't afford your lifestyle, I should step aside." I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. "In fact, let's make this official right now." "What are you doing?" "Stepping aside." My fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency. "I'm removing your access to the supplementary cards, all 3 of them. Consider it my resignation from the position of financial enabler." Her mouth opened, then closed. For once in our marriage, Nola Vero was speechless. "The cards will stop working within the hour," I continued, standing up from the breakfast bar. "Your monthly allowance is terminated effective immediately. The joint checking account now requires dual signatures for withdrawals over $50. You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. You want someone who can afford your lifestyle? Go find him. But you won't be finding him on my dime. I walked toward my home office, leaving her standing among her shopping bags like a general whose army had just deserted. Silas! Her voice followed me down the hallway. You can't do this, we're married. Yes, I called back without turning around. We are. But apparently I'm just the placeholder until someone better comes along. I closed the office door and sat down at my desk. Through the walls, I could hear Nola pacing, her heels clicking against the hardwood like an agitated metronome. My phone buzzed with a banking notification. Supplementary card access successfully revoked for Nola M. Varro. I'd built a career in financial technology by understanding systems, how they worked, where they were vulnerable, and how to protect them from exploitation. For 3 years, I'd ignored the most obvious vulnerability in my personal life. That oversight ended today. The next 72 hours unfolded with the precision of a software deployment. I'd spent years managing complex financial systems, and dismantling Nola's access proved surprisingly straightforward. She'd stormed out Tuesday evening, presumably to stay with her friend Rebecca. The apartment felt different without her presence. Quieter, but also somehow larger. I hadn't realized how much space her drama occupied until it was gone. Wednesday morning brought the first test of my new system. I was reviewing client portfolios when my phone buzzed with a notification from the credit monitoring app. Transaction declined, Nordstrom 2847, card ending in 4729. The 4729 card had been Nola's favorite, no preset spending limit, which she'd interpreted as permission for financial anarchy. I'd named it the emergency card when I gave it to her, though her definition of emergency apparently included shoes. The phone rang 6 minutes later. Silas. Her voice carried that particular strain that came from public embarrassment. There's something wrong with the card. Which card? Don't play games. The Nordstrom card isn't working. The sales associate had to cut it up in front of everyone. I leaned back in my office chair, watching the city traffic crawl past my window. That's not a malfunction, Nola. That's the system working exactly as designed. This is ridiculous. I'm trying to buy a dress for the Morrison Gallery opening. You know how important that event is for my career. Your career. I kept my voice neutral. The one you're building while married to someone who can't afford your lifestyle? Silence stretched between us. I could hear background noise, traffic maybe. She was calling from outside the store. Look, I may have been emotional yesterday, but you can't seriously expect me to live without any access to funds. You have access. The joint checking account has $1,200. That should cover reasonable expenses. $1,200? Her voice cracked. Silas, my hair appointment costs more than that. Then perhaps it's time to explore more affordable options. This is insane. You're being vindictive and petty. I'm being practical. You made it clear that our financial arrangement wasn't meeting your needs. I'm simply adjusting the arrangement to match our actual circumstances. What actual circumstances? I pulled up our household budget on my computer screen. The numbers told a story I'd been ignoring for too long. The circumstances where I earn 100% of our household income while you spend roughly 400% of your theoretical contribution. The circumstances where your monthly expenses exceed the median American family's annual income. I never asked you to track every penny I spend. I didn't track it. I just paid for it. There's a difference. Another long pause. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted to that calculated sweetness she used with restaurant servers and store clerks. Baby, I think we're both overreacting. Why don't I come home and we can talk about this properly, maybe over dinner at that little Italian place you like? The one where entrees start at $60? Money isn't everything, Silas. You're absolutely right, but it's the only thing you've talked about for the past 6 months. I heard her take a sharp breath. Fine. If this is how you want to play it, I have other options. I'm sure you do. The line went quiet, and I realized she'd hung up. No goodbye, No attempt at reconciliation, just the immediate pivot to those other options she'd mentioned. I spent the rest of Wednesday diving into our financial records with the same methodical approach I used for client audits. What I found would have impressed me if it weren't so personally devastating. Nola had been systematic. The supplementary cards weren't just tools for shopping, they were instruments of a carefully orchestrated extraction operation. Business lunches charged to my accounts, always with the same guest, Damon Vossel. I knew that name. Vossel ran a boutique investment firm that specialized in poaching clients from larger companies, my company. He'd been circling our accounts for months, offering more personalized service and higher risk, higher reward strategies. The lunch charges painted a clear picture. Nola had been providing intelligence, client names, meeting schedules, personal details that would help Vossel build relationships with my accounts. She'd turned our marriage into industrial espionage, funded by my own credit cards. Thursday brought confirmation of her other options. I was walking back from lunch when I saw them together outside the Ritz-Carlton. Nola, wearing a dress I didn't recognize, laughing at something Damon was saying. He had his hand on the small of her back in a gesture that spoke of familiarity. I stopped walking and watched them from across the street. Damon Vossel looked exactly like Central Casting would order for a successful venture capitalist. Silver at his temples, expensive suit, the kind of confident posture that came from never having to check account balances. They climbed into a black Tesla Model S Damon's car, I assumed, since Nola's BMW was still in our garage. As they pulled away, I caught a glimpse of her profile. She looked relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. That evening, I made myself dinner and ate it at our dining room table, surrounded by the artwork Nola had selected and I had purchased. The silence felt different now, not peaceful, but expectant, like the pause between lightning and thunder. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Damon. We should talk." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "I don't think we have anything to discuss." His response came immediately. "Your wife disagrees." I set the phone aside and finished my dinner. Outside our windows, the city sparkled with the lights of people living their own complicated lives. Somewhere out there, Nola was probably explaining to Damon why her husband was being unreasonable about money. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I'd spent the day doing more than reviewing our finances. I'd been exploring the cloud storage account Nola and I shared, the one she'd forgotten about when she started her new life. Her messages with Damon went back 4 months. The early ones were flirtatious, then romantic, then strategic. She'd shared client lists, meeting schedules, and personal information about my accounts. But more interesting were the financial discussions. Nola had been conducting due diligence on my assets, creating spreadsheets that cataloged everything from my retirement accounts to my client relationships. The file was titled Resource Assessment, and it read like a business plan for extracting maximum value from our marriage. At the bottom of the folder, I found the document that changed everything, a lease agreement for an apartment in Damon's building. Nola's name on the lease, his company as guarantor. Move-in date, 3 weeks ago. She hadn't just been planning to leave me. She'd already left. I was just the last to know. Friday evening arrived with the weight of inevitability. I was working late in my home office reviewing quarterly reports when my phone lit up with a banking alert. Transaction attempted. Marcel's Restaurant, 1947. Card ending in 4729. Status, declined. Marcel's, the Michelin-starred temple to culinary excess where Nola had taken me for our 2nd anniversary. The place where the wine list started at $200 and the waiters spoke in reverent whispers about the chef's vision. I checked the timestamp, 8:47 p.m., prime dinner hour for people who could afford to spend nearly $2,000 on a single meal. The phone rang 6 minutes later. Nola's contact photo filled the screen, a picture from our honeymoon, back when her smiles weren't calculated for maximum impact. Silas. Her voice was tight with barely controlled fury. What did you do? I'm reviewing client portfolios. What did you do? The card isn't working. We're sitting here like idiots while the waiter runs it again and again. We? Don't be dense. You know exactly what this is about. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere in that glittering maze, my wife was having a public meltdown at one of the most exclusive restaurants in town. Actually, I don't. Why don't you explain it to me? The card, Silas, the emergency card. It's not working. That's because it doesn't exist anymore. I closed all the supplementary accounts on Tuesday. I thought I mentioned that. The silence that followed was so complete, I wondered if the call had dropped. Then I heard voices in the background. Restaurant staff, probably, trying to resolve the situation. You can't be serious, she whispered. I'm completely serious. You said you needed someone who could afford your lifestyle. I'm not that person, remember? This is humiliating. Everyone is staring. Then perhaps you should consider ordering something more within your budget. I hear the soup is excellent at Marcel's. My budget? Her voice rose enough that I could hear it echo in what sounded like a bathroom. She'd probably excused herself to make the call. I don't have a budget. I'm your wife. You're the woman who told me to step aside for someone who can afford you, which apparently I can't. That's not what I meant, and you know it. What did you mean, exactly? Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Less angry, more calculating. Look, we can discuss this later. Right now, I need you to call the restaurant and authorize payment with your personal card. No. No? No. You wanted independence. This is what independence looks like. I heard her take a sharp breath. Fine. Fine. If this is how you want to handle things, I'll handle them myself. The line went quiet, but not the kind of quiet that meant she'd hung up. I could still hear background noise, footsteps, a door opening. Then a man's voice, confused and slightly irritated. What's going on? The waiter said there's a problem with payment? Damon Vossel. Even through the phone, his voice carried that particular blend of confidence and entitlement that came from never having to worry about money. It's my husband, Nola said, her voice muffled as if she'd moved the phone away from her mouth. He's being vindictive about the divorce. Divorce. She'd made the decision without consulting me, apparently. Give me the phone. Damon's voice came through clearly now. Let me talk to him. Damon, maybe that's not... Give me the phone, Nola. A rustling sound, then Damon's voice directly in my ear. Oren? This is Damon Vossel. I think we need to have a conversation. Do we? Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you're embarrassing your wife in public. That's not acceptable. I almost laughed. My wife? Is that what she told you? What's that supposed to mean? It means you might want to ask Nola about the apartment lease she signed 3 weeks ago, the one with your company as guarantor. Silence. I could picture him processing this information, probably looking at Nola with new questions in his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. Apartment 4B in your building, lease dated 3 weeks ago. Furniture purchased on my credit cards and delivered to that address. Should I continue? More silence. Then, quietly, how do you know about that? Because I pay attention, Mr. Vossel. Unlike some people, I don't make major life decisions based on incomplete information. Listen, Oren. No, you listen. You want to play house with my wife? That's between you and her, but you'll be doing it without my financial support. The woman sitting across from you at Marcel's has exactly $1,200 to her name. If that's not enough to cover dinner, maybe you should have chosen a more affordable restaurant. I hung up before he could respond. For the next hour, I tried to focus on work, but my concentration was broken. I kept thinking about Nola sitting in that bathroom, trying to figure out how to salvage the evening. About Damon realizing that his new girlfriend came with significantly more baggage and significantly less financial backing than he'd assumed. Around 10:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Nola. "We need to talk. This isn't over." I typed back, "You're right, it's just beginning." But I didn't send it. Instead, I deleted the message and turned off my phone. Some conversations were better had in daylight, when emotions were cooler and lawyers were available. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The apartment was quiet. The bed was mine alone. And for the first time in years, I wasn't worried about what tomorrow's credit card statements would reveal. I was finally learning the difference between being alone and being lonely. Alone was peaceful. Lonely was what happened when you lived with someone who saw you as a resource rather than a person. Saturday morning brought coffee, silence, and the systematic destruction of my marriage through forensic accounting. I'd always been methodical. It's what made me good at my job. But I'd never applied that same analytical rigor to my personal life. That oversight ended now. I started with the cloud storage account Nola had forgotten we shared. 3 years of digital breadcrumbs, carefully preserved by automatic backup systems she'd never bothered to understand. Her messages, photos, documents, and browser history, all synchronized across our devices in the name of marital transparency. The early messages with Damon were almost quaint in their innocence. Flirtation disguised as business networking, compliments about her insights into the financial services industry. She'd met him at a gallery opening, one of those cultural events she attended to build her personal brand. But the tone shifted quickly. Within 2 weeks, their conversations had moved from professional interest to personal attraction. Within a month, they were exchanging photos I definitely hadn't taken. What impressed me, in a perverse way, was the strategic thinking. Nola wasn't just having an affair, she was conducting corporate espionage with remarkable sophistication. Silas mentioned the Henderson account is getting nervous about market volatility, she'd written in early March. "Maybe you should reach out directly. I could arrange an introduction." 3 days later. "The Yamamoto portfolio is up for review next month. Silas thinks they're happy, but Mrs. Yamamoto asked me about alternative investment strategies at the charity luncheon." She'd been weaponizing cocktail party conversations and pillow talk, turning our social connections into business intelligence for my competitor. Every client dinner, every industry event, every casual conversation had been mined for actionable information. But the real revelation was in a folder labeled Future Planning. Nola had created a comprehensive analysis of our financial situation, my assets, income streams, debt obligations, and potential divorce settlement scenarios. The level of detail would have impressed a forensic accountant. The centerpiece was a document titled Resource Assessment and Extraction Timeline. It read like a business plan for ending our marriage with maximum financial benefit to her. She'd researched divorce attorneys, calculated alimony projections, and even identified which assets would be easiest to liquidate. According to her timeline, she'd planned to file for divorce in 6 months, after establishing a relationship with Damon and securing her position at his firm. The apartment lease was just the first step in a carefully orchestrated transition. I was reading through her correspondence with various divorce attorneys when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized the voice immediately. "Mr. Oren, this is Gerald Varro, Nola's father." Gerald. The struggling manufacturing executive who'd been bleeding money for 3 years while refusing to modernize his business model. I'd met him exactly 4 times, and each conversation had ended with a request for financial advice that really meant financial assistance. "Mr. Varro, how can I help you? I think you know why I'm calling. Nola told me about your difficulties, this situation with the credit cards." "Did she? And what's your understanding of the situation?" "Look, son, I know marriage can be complicated, but you can't just cut off a woman's access to funds. That's financial abuse." Financial abuse. The phrase had clearly been provided by someone with legal training, probably one of those divorce attorneys Nola had been consulting. "Mr. Varro, I removed my wife's access to credit accounts that she was using to fund activities I didn't approve of. That's called financial responsibility." "Activities you didn't approve of? Who are you to approve or disapprove of what my daughter does? I pulled up another document from Nola's folder, a loan application for Vero Manufacturing, with my signature forged on the personal guarantee section. I'm the person whose signature you forged on loan documents for your company. Would you like to discuss financial abuse, Mr. Vero? Because I have some interesting documentation we could review. The line went quiet. I could hear him breathing, probably trying to figure out how much I actually knew. I don't know what you're talking about. Vero Manufacturing, line of credit application dated February 15th. Personal guarantee section, page 4. My signature, except I never signed it. My handwriting, except I never wrote it. Should I continue? Now listen here. No, you listen. Your daughter has been conducting a systematic extraction operation on my assets for months. You've been forging my signature on loan documents. And now you're calling to lecture me about financial abuse? You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can. I have the original documents, handwriting analysis, and a complete paper trail of fund transfers from my accounts to your company. What I don't have is any patience for this conversation. I hung up and immediately called my attorney. Some problems required professional intervention. David Chen had been handling my legal affairs for 5 years. Corporate contracts, real estate transactions, the mundane paperwork of a successful career. He'd never handled a divorce, but he knew enough to recommend someone who could. Silas, this is unexpected. What's going on? I gave him the abbreviated version. The affair, the forged documents, the systematic financial extraction. David listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. How much are we talking about? He asked when I finished. Roughly $200,000 in unauthorized charges over 6 months. Another $50,000 in forged loan guarantees. Plus whatever she's planning to claim in divorce proceedings. Jesus, and you have documentation for all of this? Complete digital records, messages, photos, financial documents, even browser history showing her research into divorce attorneys and asset valuation? Silas, this isn't just adultery. This is fraud, potentially criminal fraud. I know, but I don't want to destroy her. I just want to protect myself. Those might not be mutually exclusive goals. Give me the weekend to review everything and consult with a family law specialist. Don't make any more changes to accounts or access until we talk. What about the forged loan guarantees? That's a separate issue. We'll need to notify the banks immediately and file fraud reports. The sooner we act, the better your position. After I hung up, I spent the rest of Saturday organizing evidence and trying to understand how I'd missed the signs. The clues had been there: late nights, networking, sudden interest in my business activities, expensive purchases she couldn't explain. But I'd been distracted by work, and frankly, I'd enjoyed having a beautiful wife who seemed interested in my career. I'd mistaken intelligence gathering for genuine curiosity, espionage for affection. The sun was setting when I finally closed my laptop and looked around our apartment. Everything I could see had been selected by Nola: the furniture, artwork, even the books on the shelves. She'd created a perfect backdrop for the life she wanted, funded entirely by someone she was planning to discard. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Damon. We should meet. There are things you don't understand about the situation. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "You're right. Let's talk. Monday, 6 p.m., parking garage under your building. Come alone." His response was immediate. Agreed. I had 2 days to prepare for a conversation that would determine whether this situation ended with lawyers or something more direct. Either way, it was time for Mr. Damon Vossel to understand that some resources were more dangerous to extract than others. Monday evening arrived with the weight of inevitability. I'd spent the weekend preparing for this conversation the way I prepared for difficult client presentations, researching, strategizing, and anticipating every possible response. The parking garage under Damon's building was a study in urban minimalism: concrete, fluorescent lighting, and the echo of expensive cars. I arrived 10 minutes early and positioned myself near the elevator bank where I could see the entire level. Damon emerged from the elevator at exactly 6 o'clock, scanning the garage with the cautious air of someone who'd never been in a physical confrontation. He was smaller than he'd appeared from across the street, maybe 5'8", with the soft build of someone whose exercise came from a personal trainer rather than actual labor. "Oren," he approached with his hand extended, as if this were a business meeting. "Thanks for agreeing to meet." I didn't take his hand. "Mr. Vossel, I assume you have something important to discuss, or you wouldn't have suggested this meeting." He lowered his hand and studied my face. "Look, I think there's been some misunderstanding about the situation with Nola." "What kind of misunderstanding?" "She told me you two were separated, that you'd been having problems for months and had agreed to divorce." I almost smiled. "And you believed her?" "Why wouldn't I? She was living in her own apartment, had her own credit cards, seemed completely independent." "Her own apartment that your company guaranteed, her own credit cards that I paid for, her independence that was funded entirely by my income." He shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't know about the credit cards." "But you knew about the apartment. You knew about the client information she was sharing. You knew about the forged loan documents for her father's company." "What forged loan documents?" I pulled out my phone and showed him photos of the paperwork. "My signature, except I never signed these, guaranteeing loans for Varo Manufacturing, which coincidentally started banking with your firm last month." His face went pale as he scrolled through the images. "I had no idea. Nola said her father had found new financing, but I never connected it to you." "Mr. Vossel, you're either lying or you're incredibly naive. Either way, you've been participating in a systematic fraud operation." "Now wait a minute." "No, you wait." I stepped closer, and he instinctively moved back. "You've been sleeping with my wife, using intelligence she stole from me to poach my clients, and benefiting from financial fraud. The only question is whether you're a co-conspirator or just a useful idiot." "I resent the implication." "I don't care what you resent. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop all contact with Nola immediately. You're going to return any client information she provided, and you're going to cooperate fully with the fraud investigation I'm filing tomorrow." "You can't prove I knew about any fraud." I pulled out a folder and handed him copies of the messages between him and Nola. "Actually, I can. Thanks for the Henderson info. I'll reach out this week. The Yamamoto situation is perfect timing. Your husband's client list is a goldmine." He flipped through the pages, his face growing redder with each message. "She said you were sharing this information voluntarily, that you were trying to help her build connections in the industry. And you believed that too? Look, I made some mistakes, but I never intended to commit fraud. Intention is irrelevant. Impact is what matters. And the impact is that you've participated in identity theft, corporate espionage, and financial fraud." He handed back the folder with shaking hands. "What do you want?" "I want you to disappear from my life and my wife's life. I want written confirmation that you'll return all client information and cease any business relationships that resulted from Nola's intelligence. And I want a full accounting of any financial benefits your firm received from this arrangement." "And if I cooperate?" "Then I might consider limiting the criminal charges to fraud and identity theft instead of adding conspiracy and racketeering." "This is blackmail." "No, this is consequences. You gambled that sleeping with someone else's wife would be profitable. You lost." Damon looked around the garage as if searching for an escape route. "I need time to think about this." "You have until tomorrow at noon. After that, I file reports with the police, the SEC, and every professional licensing board that regulates your industry." "You're destroying my career over a misunderstanding." "I'm protecting myself from people who thought they could profit from destroying my marriage. There's a difference." I turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing, Mr. Vossel. Nola is going to need a new place to live. That apartment lease your company guaranteed? I'd recommend terminating it immediately. She's about to become a very expensive liability. I walked away without waiting for his response. Behind me, I heard him fumble for his phone, probably calling Nola to warn her that their carefully constructed plan was collapsing. The elevator ride to street level gave me time to process what had just happened. For months, I'd been the victim of a sophisticated operation designed to extract maximum value from my assets while positioning me for disposal. But victimhood was a temporary condition, and I'd just taken the first step toward changing my circumstances. My phone buzzed with a text from Nola. "Damon told me about your meeting. We need to talk immediately." I typed back, "We'll talk through attorneys from now on." Her response came immediately. "You're making a huge mistake. I can make this very difficult for you." I stared at the message for a moment, then deleted it without responding. Some threats weren't worth dignifying with a reply. Tuesday morning, I met with David Chen and a family law specialist named Patricia Williams. We spent 3 hours reviewing evidence and planning strategy. By noon, we'd filed fraud reports with 2 banks and the police, initiated divorce proceedings, and sent cease and desist letters to both Damon and Nola. "This is going to get ugly," Patricia warned me as we finished the paperwork. "People don't react well when their carefully planned extraction operations fall apart." "How ugly?" "Expect character assassination, false accusations, maybe even harassment. People like your wife don't accept defeat gracefully." She was right. By Wednesday, I'd received calls from 3 different attorneys representing Nola, each with increasingly aggressive demands for financial support and asset division. My office voicemail was full of messages from Nola herself, alternating between tearful apologies and furious threats. But the most interesting development came Thursday afternoon. David called with an update on the fraud investigation. The bank flagged something unusual in the Vero manufacturing account. Large cash withdrawals, always just under the reporting threshold. Looks like someone was systematically extracting funds and converting them to untraceable assets. How much? Nearly 100,000 over 3 months. And here's the interesting part. The withdrawals stopped the day after your confrontation with Damon. Someone was liquidating the operation. That's what it looks like. The question is whether they were planning to disappear or just covering their tracks. I thought about Nola's text messages, the increasingly desperate tone of her attorney's calls, and Damon's pale face in the parking garage. "They were planning to disappear," I said. "This whole thing was designed to extract as much value as possible before vanishing." "Well, they're not vanishing now. We've frozen all the accounts and flagged their passports. If they try to leave the country, we'll know immediately." That evening, I was working late in my home office when the building's doorman called. "Mr. Oren, there's a woman here who says she's your wife. She doesn't have her key and seems quite upset. Should I send her up?" "No, she's not welcome here. If she becomes disruptive, call building security." "Understood, sir." 20 minutes later, my phone rang, Nola's name on the caller ID. "Silas, please, we need to talk face to face. We have nothing to discuss." "That's not true. I know you're angry, but you're destroying both our lives over a misunderstanding." "What misunderstanding? The part where you committed fraud, or the part where you were planning to disappear with my money?" Silence. Then, quietly, "How did you find out about that?" "Because I'm not as stupid as you thought I was." "I never thought you were stupid, I made some bad decisions." "You made criminal decisions. There's a difference." "It doesn't have to be like this. We can work something out. I can make this right." "The only thing you can make right is a full confession and complete restitution. Everything else is between you and the justice system." "You're really going to destroy me over this?" "Nola, you destroyed yourself. I'm just refusing to be collateral damage." I hung up and turned off my phone. Outside the windows, the city sparkled with lights and possibilities. Somewhere in that maze, my wife and her accomplice were probably planning their next move. But for the first time in months, I wasn't worried about what they might do. I'd learned the difference between being a victim and being a target. Victims were passive, helpless, dependent on others for protection. Targets fought back. 3 months later, I sat in Patricia Williams' office reviewing the final divorce settlement. The numbers told a story of systematic fraud unraveled and justice served, though not in the dramatic fashion Hollywood might have preferred. "Nola agreed to everything?" I asked, scanning the document. "Complete capitulation. No alimony, no asset division, no claims against your retirement accounts or business interests. She even agreed to pay restitution for the forged loan guarantees." "And Damon?" "His firm is under SEC investigation. 3 clients have filed complaints, and his business license is suspended pending review. He'll be lucky to avoid criminal charges." The investigation had revealed the full scope of their operation. Nola and Damon hadn't just targeted me. They'd been running similar schemes on 2 other couples, using romantic relationships to gain access to financial information and business intelligence. The pattern was always the same: identify successful professionals with assets worth extracting, establish romantic connections, gradually gain access to financial accounts and business information, then execute a planned extraction and disappearance. I'd been victim number 3, but unlike the others, I'd fought back before they could complete their exit strategy. "What about Nola's father?" "Gerald Vero filed for bankruptcy last week. The forged loan guarantees triggered default clauses on his existing credit lines. Vero Manufacturing is being liquidated." Patricia closed the file and looked at me directly. "Silas, I have to ask, how do you feel about all this? Some people struggle with the aftermath, even when they've been completely vindicated." I considered the question. 3 months ago, I'd been married to a woman I thought I loved, living in an apartment she'd decorated, funding a lifestyle that seemed to make her happy. Now I was divorced, living alone, and my ex-wife was facing potential criminal charges. "I feel free," I said finally. "For the first time in years, I'm not wondering what tomorrow's credit card statements will show. I'm not analyzing every conversation for hidden meanings. I'm not funding someone else's extraction operation. Any regrets?" "Just one. I regret not paying attention sooner." That evening, I walked through my apartment, truly my apartment now, and tried to decide what to change. Nola had chosen everything, from the artwork to the furniture to the books on the shelves. Living here felt like inhabiting someone else's idea of success. But I wasn't ready to redecorate. The apartment served as a reminder of how easily I'd been manipulated, how willingly I'd funded my own exploitation. Those lessons were worth preserving. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Mia, Nola's friend. I heard about the divorce. If you ever want to talk to someone who understands what she's really like, call me." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. I'd learned enough about Nola's circle of friends to know that getting involved with any of them would be like jumping from one extraction operation into another. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, good wine, but not the $1,000 bottles Nola had preferred, and sat on the balcony overlooking the city. 6 months ago, I'd been married to a woman who saw me as a resource to be exploited. I'd funded her lifestyle, her affairs, and ultimately her plan to destroy me financially. I'd been so focused on being a good husband that I'd forgotten to pay attention to whether I had a good wife. The divorce had cost me roughly $50,000 in legal fees, but I'd recovered most of the fraudulent charges and avoided what could have been a catastrophic asset division. More importantly, I'd learned to recognize the difference between love and exploitation. My phone rang. David Chen, probably with an update on the criminal investigation. "Silas, I have news. Nola just accepted a plea agreement. Fraud in the 3rd degree, 2 years probation, full restitution, no jail time, but she'll have a criminal record." "And Damon?" "Still fighting the charges, but his attorney called today asking about plea options. I think he's realizing that going to trial would expose the full scope of the operation." "What about the other victims?" "Both couples are filing civil suits. Nola and Damon are looking at significant financial liability beyond the criminal charges. After I hung up, I opened my laptop and looked at the financial projections I'd been working on. For the first time in years, my budget showed a substantial surplus. Without Nola's expenses, I was saving more money than I'd ever thought possible. I'd been funding 2 lifestyles, mine and hers, while she planned to eliminate mine entirely. The irony was perfect. Nola had demanded that I step aside for someone who could afford her lifestyle. I'd done exactly that, and she'd discovered that no one could afford her lifestyle, not sustainably, not without being systematically defrauded. My doorman called around 9 o'clock. "Mr. Oren, there's a delivery for you. Envelope, no return address." "Send it up." The envelope contained a single sheet of paper, a handwritten note from Nola. "Silas, I know you'll never forgive me and I don't expect you to, but I want you to know that I never meant for things to go this far. It started as a way to help my family's business, and then it became something else. I made terrible decisions, and I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I'm sorry. N." I read the note twice, then walked to the kitchen and dropped it in the garbage disposal. Some apologies were too little, too late, and too obviously calculated for sympathy. But as I was getting ready for bed, I found myself thinking about the woman I'd married 3 years ago. Not the criminal who'd systematically defrauded me, but the charming, ambitious person who'd seemed to find me interesting. Had that woman ever existed, or had the entire relationship been a performance designed to gain access to my assets? I'd probably never know. But it didn't matter anymore. I'd learned to recognize the difference between someone who loved me and someone who loved what I could provide. The apartment was quiet as I turned off the lights and headed to bed. Tomorrow, I'd wake up in a space that was entirely mine, funded by income that no one else was secretly redirecting, surrounded by possessions that no one was planning to liquidate. For the first time in years, I was looking forward to checking my credit card statements. Outside my windows, the city continued its restless dance of ambition and desire. Somewhere in that maze, other people were probably funding their own exploitation, mistaking financial abuse for love, confusing extraction operations with marriage. But that was their lesson to learn. I'd learned mine. The woman who demanded that I step aside for someone who could afford her lifestyle had been absolutely right. I couldn't afford her lifestyle. No one could, not without being systematically defrauded. But I could afford my own life, and that turned out to be more than enough.